In a world filled with information, where do you turn to get straight talk about retirement, investments, and your money? Lock it in to the longest-running financial talk show in Arkansas, and let us help you build the bridge between information and application. Real financial change begins right here, and it starts with you.
It's showtime!
On today's show, hot inflation data released this week. We'll have an update on the markets and the economy, plus the challenges for the sandwich generation, keeping your goals in mind while caring for others.
This is the Get Ready for the Future show.
Whether it's online, on radio, or on podcast, we are glad to have you along for the Get Ready for the Future show. My name is Scott Inman, along with me, John Shrewsbury, and Tim Key for another edition today. And lots to talk about. We have definitely been keeping our finger on the pulse of the economy and the markets in pretty much all of 2022, guys. Obviously, this has been a very prolonged downturn for investors to have to get through, slog through in many ways. And so we are spending a little more time in recent months looking at the data and kind of giving some reassurance and perspective through all of this. The big number that was released this week, and as we go on the air on live stream and record for our other platforms, it was actually just released a few hours ago. So it's still very generally discussed. We haven't seen under the hood too much yet, but we've done our best before showtime to talk a little bit about this. Inflation. In the year over year, this is June inflation, June of 2022 compared to June of 2021. Our increase in the overall cost of goods, or at least a large basket of goods and services, was up 9.1%. Huge number. Higher than the expected consensus of 8.8%. So again, the market's a little rattled by that initially, although they are coming off their lows a little bit as we speak on the trading day today, moving forward. So let's kind of talk a little bit about that because, John, we've both had a chance to look at this. The Fast is 4, by the way, which is a part of our radio broadcast, and you can sign up to be a part of it in your email inbox by texting the word FAST to 501-381-5228, 501-381-5228. We're going to talk about it extensively on today's Fastest 4 Minutes in Finance. But let's talk a little bit about it here. What did you see in the numbers, John?
Well, I think this is a lot like, when you go to, I love going to watch the Razorbacks play. So I go to the game, and then I get back to my car, and I turn the radio on, and somebody's going, hey, the final score was... I know what the final score was. I was there through the game. I knew what was happening in the game. I saw the game. I played almost in the game.
Felt like you did.
Felt like I did. And now somebody's telling me the final score. That's what this inflation number is. We all felt the higher prices in April, May, and June, and it really kind of reared its ugly head in June. But what they're not telling you today is the fact that prices have begun to moderate in July. We've seen gas prices come down. We've seen commodity prices come down. We've seen lumber prices come down. A lot of things are beginning to moderate. And so is it happy days are here again? Probably not, but we're still going to have a higher level of inflation. But I think that, this is kind of like telling you what did happen, not what's going to happen.
Yeah, and if you take out the highly volatile food and gas prices went up almost 60% year over year, an incredible number. So that is really driving a lot of this. And, that is what people pay for. I mean, I always temper saying, hey, take out the food and gas because that's what we spend our money on. It is very important. But in a perspective sense, taking a look at everything across the board, we're not up at a 9% clip by any means. And we really are. We're using the term inflection point. We're really at an inflection point in the economy. And that's where markets are kind of on hold right now. Tim, if you look, we've talked about this, you and I, many days we've started off a trading day in the green and ended up red, or vice versa. We've started in the red and ended up green. I think there's probably good proof out there that we've found a bottom in this current downturn, but we may hover here for a little bit because the market just doesn't know which way to go right now.
Yeah, the market's certainly looking for a bottom. Whether we found it or not, we'll know probably soon. But, one of the first things I do every morning, I pull up Yahoo Finance and I look and see, are the futures red or green on my app? But here lately, these last few weeks, we've started out big negative or big positive and ended up the day going the other direction. So the market's really still trying to find itself. And there's a lot of news out there. Inflation being one, interest rates are probably going to go up another 75 basis points here at the end of the month by the Fed. And there's just a lot of things. And I think it's kind of funny, we talk about the core inflation, and I think it was 5.1%, and it was a little bit lower, and it's come down a little bit. But who doesn't buy gas and groceries?
Yeah.
I mean, so we have to include those, and especially the gas prices. I know it's, we're kind of happy that we're seeing gas under $4 a gallon right now, but it's kind of sad that we're seeing gas at under $4 a gallon too.
Right,
so.
Right.
But, there's a lot of things that are moving right now. There's a lot of news. The headlines are still negative. I think everyone piles onto it. So the market is trying to find its bottom. Hopefully we'll find that in the next month or two, if not sooner, and get to move forward.
Now, right behind this inflation data, John, we're going to see some earnings start to come out from corporations. Yep. And that's really the connecting point that we haven't had yet. Inflation has not driven down overall corporate earnings because consumers so far have weathered the storm. Now, we know that can't happen forever, and that's why we've got to get this inflation under control. But it's still too soon to really say it's going to wreck the economy.
Yeah, and as long as earnings hold up, the economy and the market itself is literally going to react to those earnings. Yes, it will react to 9.1% inflation. It did for a little while today, but it's bounced back. And in that intraday trading is a little bit encouraging to me to have that much inflation and the market's not selling off and staying down.
Right.
I think that's good. But I think the big thing, Scott, that I love about where we are right now is not necessarily what's going on in the economy, but what's going on in the heads of our clients. Because are we getting a few calls or emails about, hey, is everything okay? Do I need to be doing anything or anything of that nature? But for the most part, everybody has great perspective. And I think the perspective has got to be a long-term perspective.
Yep.
I was just noticing, I love to kind of look at things in a different way. And I look at, the last 6 months have been terrible, but if you go back for the last 5 years, the S&P 500 has made a nice climb. If you take out the anomaly of the downturn that we had with COVID and then the big run-up in reaction to the reopening from COVID, there has been progress going forward. And I think if you think about this in a general term, are we progressing forward in the big picture? Then we're still doing that. We're still moving forward, even though we've had a pretty significant setback from the high, but that high was actually an anomaly in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think this should be a really good learning point for investors that if you need to spend money you have in the next 6 to 8 months, maybe even, let's say, a year or two, you don't need to be in the stock market with those funds. We don't plan for our retirement clients that way, right? The early buckets that we talk about on the Get Ready for the Future show, those are not invested in equities. In fact, in many situations, they are powder dry. They are in cash so that your monthly income is not going to be affected by the day-to-day, the month-to-month in the market. And if you are invested in equities, you always have to remember that they are long-term instruments to achieve a long-term goal. And what's happened in the markets in 2022 doesn't mean it's going to happen forever. And if you've ridden the elevator down, the last thing you want to do is get off on the lower floor before it goes back up to the higher floors.
Yeah, I was going to mention that because a lot of people are receiving their second quarter or June statements in the mail right now. Or maybe you've been scared and finally went out online and saw that your balance is down maybe 8% for the month of June or almost 15% for the second quarter if you've been invested in equities. Mm-hmm. And now is the wrong time to jump off that elevator. You've ridden it down. I know a lot of people will see the balance go down and it's like, I can't take any more, and they'll move it out and they'll move it to something safe. But when that correction or when that market starts moving forward again, you don't want to miss that.
Yeah, and I think we've got enough experience on our team to have been through this movie before, and we've seen those mistakes before, and we know those are the critical mistakes. I call it portfolio destruction. You're blowing up your portfolio. Now, you may be asking, well, why do I even bother with these equities? They're way up and they're way down, and they're so mercurial. What do I do with this? The reason that you want to stay in equities and the reason that we invest a portion of our clients' money in equities is because equities and real estate are the only two asset classes that long-term have beaten, here's the key word, inflation.
Right.
you got to have an answer for inflation. So if you're going to have an answer for inflation, and that's equities, you're going to have some volatility. But volatility is not necessarily a bad thing. Volatility is a price worth paying to stay ahead of inflation. And when you look at the long-term trend of your equity portfolio, it should be the one thing, along with real estate, if you hold real estate, that has kept you ahead of things as far as prices are concerned.
So let's kind of dig into that a little bit before we get on to the rest of the content in today's show. When you talk about why do you need to have an investment that outpaces inflation? Well, the answer is buying power, because eventually, guys, you're going to turn these assets into income in retirement. And you're going to not only do that, but during the course of a potential 20-year retirement, maybe 25-year retirement, you're going to need to increase the income you receive in day one later in that time span. So you've got to remain, even in retirement, with a portion of your assets, Tim, invested in equities.
Yeah, when we plan for monthly income. And the monthly income that you're going to get when you retire at 60, 65, whatever the age is, in 10, 15 years, you're going to want more income coming in to really just continue the standard of living you're used to, because it will not buy the same amount of goods as it did 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah. And we see that in all kinds of things now. Gas prices and some things kind of go back and forth, but groceries, I think we've all seen that at the grocery store. That I hear it from my wife all the time. You need to go do the shopping if you're going to complain about how much we're spending. So
I hope she's listening today.
She probably will, won't she?
Tell her.
We now know how things roll at the Tim Key household.
It's a show Lori does not want to miss.
It's rough, and I have learned not to say anything about that anymore.
But you just did.
I did on the radio, right? So I've learned not to say it at home. But anyway. Yeah. You know, things are more expensive everywhere, whether it's cars, whether it's clothes. I mean, it is hard to keep your spending under control. And I know over a period of time, it's just going to get harder. So we have to have pay raises during retirement, just like you get pay raises with your work at your job today.
So how should you respond to those really big inflation numbers that all the talking heads are rattling about? I think we just said it, right? Stay invested in the asset classes that have historically outpaced inflation so that you can increase your buying power when you reach retirement. We just did, I'll give you a great case in point. Tim and I just met with a couple, began planning for them earlier this week, in fact, and we ran some scenarios of if they're actually going through a career change. One of the members of the family is going through a career change and is not able currently to contribute to a retirement plan. So we took their asset level now and projected what it may grow to in the next, was it 8 or 9 years that they were planning to retire without adding anything to it. And that's not the overall plan. The hope is they'll get back on their feet to a point where they can contribute to a retirement plan. But if they don't, here's what they'll end up with at retirement. And here's the amount of monthly income that would produce when you account for Social Security and other income sources. And it came out to $9,500 gross income per month. Now, that sounds pretty good in today's dollars, right? But 8 or 9 years from now, and certainly we don't expect 9% inflation for that entire duration. We're going to go down. History tells us that. But $9,500 8 or 9 years from now is not going to buy what $9,500 does today. So that is, I think, a real good case in point to show them that they need to continue to add to their retirement savings.
Guys, I think everybody would like to have some good news. Would you like to have some good news?
I thought we were trying to get there today.
Well, this will get us there. Okay. Here's the estimate. This is just from our friend Mary Beth Franklin, who is a contributing editor to Investment News. All this inflation basically is going to mean somewhere around an estimated 10% increase in Social Security. So let's think about the impact of that on our ready-to-retire clients. When we think about how we model income in the flooring and bucketing strategy that we use here at GenWealth, at no time do we ever project there to be a 10% increase in their Social Security.
Right. Yeah, we usually use a 1 or 2% at the most, and because we just don't expect it, and we also know that the cost of Medicare that they charge you on Social Security usually goes up, and we saw a big hike on that last year. And we'll probably see another one, but a 10% increase is going to be a big impact on a lot of people's checks, but it's still just barely keeping up with the 9.1% inflation we've got now.
But then when you look at the actual effect of that on their income stream, yes, they will have more income coming in from Social Security. That puts less pressure on their buckets, if you will, because the income that they have as far as their basic living expenses are concerned, that's all locked in and guaranteed. The buckets are things that are going to, supplement income if you need it, and Social Security will be able to take some pressure off of that arrangement.
It highlights how the mechanics all work together in a ready-to-retire client's plan. I mean, really, that's what it boils down to. Stocks have been bad in 2022. Bonds have been bad in 2022. Real estate has been good in 2022.
Yep.
And now we're seeing maybe some fixed income increases on the Social Security side, right? Your guaranteed income might go up it did go up in 2022, and it looks like it's going to go up again in 2023. So all of it is in balance if you have a diversified investment strategy.
Hey, if you don't have an advisor that is orchestrating all of this, if you think about this, you're bringing this in at this time, this in at this time. When you have this, more of this, you have less of this. That's a complex plan.
Yep.
And that's how we plan at GenWealth. If you're not experiencing that with your advisor, you probably need to check up and say, okay, how do I get that? And you can do that by simply giving us a call and sitting down with one of our advisors to walk through the ready to retire process.
All right, so speaking of complex, there is this term called the sandwich generation, and their lives are complex. You're you're caught in the middle, so to speak. It's defined as middle-aged Americans bringing up their children, whether they're still in school or paying for their college currently, like Tim and I are, while at the same time having to care for aging parents, and what causes a big problem in their retirement plan, because they often take their retirement and set it on the back burner and have no goals for retirement, or don't try to achieve those goals actively because of the expense level that exists on both sides generationally. So let's talk a little bit about that, getting inside of that. Now, this data said that it's mostly Gen X clients, and Gen X is described as being born in 1980, I think, to, is it 95? I think it goes all the way up to 95.
I think so, 95, 96.
I was born in 73, and my kids, I have one at home still, and I have 3 in college right now. So I think I'm still considered the sandwich generation. My parents are living and not needing much care right now, but they're in their 70s.
Well,
right?
and I've been through the sandwich, if you will. It's not necessarily generational. It really is just your situation in life. If you've got aging parents and you've got kids, then your attention is split. Mm-hmm. You're being tugged, and you're sandwiched between those two needs that you need to respond to. And it literally is one of the toughest times in life. I know I struggled a lot with it. My parents are gone now, but it is a very, very hard time to juggle, what's going on at the house with the kids and the activities and the ball games and the homework and all of that. And oh, by the way, mom or dad can't do all the things that they used to be able to do, and I've got to go over there and take care of this, and that takes time away from that nuclear family that you're responsible for.
Yeah, there's so many more responsibilities that come onto your plate, and actually I just looked up Gen X. It's 1965 to 1980, so we're definitely.
Oh, I was really. We are Gen X.
We are Gen X.
I had the wrong generation there.
So it is our generation. Yeah. Now, 10 years from now, it'll be a Gen Y or whatever the next generation is.
I am Gen X. I was thinking millennials. I transposed millennials there for some reason. You're right. Gen X is us.
That's us.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, we've got kids. I've got a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old that I'm taking care of, trying to get one through college and the other into high school, and so I've got that responsibility. And then we've got Lori's mom that lives in town, and we are spending time with her. She's definitely capable and lives on her own and does all that. So we don't have a lot of. She doesn't have a lot of needs that we have to meet financially or anything like that. But a lot of people do. A lot of people are taking their parents to a lot of hospital visits and doctors' offices and things like that. And sometimes you're having to, because Social Security just isn't enough and there wasn't good planning going on maybe with your parents, you're actually coming out financially and helping them there. And so there are a lot of choices and priorities that have to be made and met. So being able to have a plan and making sure that your plan is geared toward making sure that you're going to be okay, and then sequencing that to either your kids or your parents or whatever it is very important.
Yeah, I think it's important to think of this as you still have to consider it an expense, and it has to be budgeted for as best you can. And I know that seems like a runaway train, right? If you're living this right now and you've got college on one side or child care if both spouses work, and then you've got health care needs, long-term care needs facing you on the other side with your parents, and you're in that sandwich generation. But you have to consider that as part of your budget as much as possible, and prepare ahead of time for those expenses so that they don't have to come out of your monthly budget. So we're going to give you a couple of things here to consider. And I know that if you're already there, it may be difficult to squeeze out the dimes to make this happen. But if you are in a place where you can consider it or begin to do it, I think these things make sense. So let's talk about the college side first, or really any even secondary private school needs, as the case were. You may have heard of a 529 plan. Very commonly thrown around there. Most of our clients have at least heard of it, but they don't really understand the dynamics of it. So let's talk about the advantages. And I don't know that I'd go full on and say disadvantage here, John, but it is definitely something clients need to know about and maybe consider other options. But a 529 plan is built just for educational purposes. You as a parent or even a grandparent can make contributions into this 529 plan. And it is a great tax advantage for you to do so on the front end if you are contributing into a plan in which the state administers and you live in that state. In other words, the Arkansas Gift Plan is the 529 plan that is run here. If you live in the state of Arkansas and you contribute to the Arkansas Gift Plan, there's a tax deduction for up to $10,000 for a married couple to put money into that on an annual basis. So you get a tax deduction on the front end on your state income taxes. And then if the money is pulled out for qualified educational expenses for that child, it is tax-free for tuition, for even things outside of that like computers. But there is a list that is restrictive on what a qualified education expense is.
Yeah, and there are a lot of what-ifs, we'll call them, in a 529 plan. And we're going to talk about some other alternatives here on that. But a 529 plan is specifically for college. You can put up to like $250,000 in it. Contributions can be applied on an annual basis or a monthly basis or whatever the case may be. And as Scott said, it is literally tax-free. Of course, you've already paid tax on the money going in, but the earnings that as they come out are tax-free. Now, that has to be spent for college, and you have all kinds of issues if that is not spent for college. You get a 10% penalty if it's not spent for college, and the IRS is pretty good at going back and checking those things. I've had several clients say that they actually check them as far as their 529 expenses are concerned. So you've got that. You've got a Coverdale savings account, which also is a very similar to a 529 plan, except your contribution limits are only $2,000 in the Coverdale. A lot of our clients, Scott, just invest in mutual funds that are jointly held by the husband and wife because they maintain control over that money. There's no restrictions on how they spend it. They don't get the tax benefits that you outlined with the 529, but they have more control and less restrictions.
Yeah, free of the penalties.
Yeah, you have a lot more flexibility at that point too. Now, the 529, if your child doesn't go to college or they don't use all the money, there are a lot of availability to pass that on to another sibling, to a cousin. It has to be a relative, but that relative list is,
pretty expensive.
Pretty broad.
Expensive, yes.
It's a family reunion type list.
It's a family reunion. I know Joe. I saw him 3 years ago.
Exactly.
But you have to ask yourself, are you really interested in funding your cousin's college education or something like that?
Right.
But here's the thing I think a lot of people think about. They don't know early on whether their kid's going to go to college or not.
Right.
And college is not necessarily for everybody. Do they want to have the flexibility to give them that money when they want to give it to them, have control of it until they want to give it to them, and then give it to them to do things like maybe start a business or buy a house or whatever the laundry list might be to get started in life. 529 plans don't get you started in life. They pay for college. And a mutual fund or some other type investment that grows and you pay taxes on the earnings over time, and you can have ways of limiting that by picking the investments that you fund that mutual fund with. But at any rate, there is a lot of options for this, and I think it really does depend on the client or the parent's temperament what they want to do and how much control they want to have over that.
One other type of account we could mention here is the UGMA or the UTMA. The UTMA is the Uniform Transfer to Minors Act, which is just the law that created this option for an account. I've never opened one for a client, but I have onboarded some clients who already had one, and so I've had to deal with the complexities of that. And many times, the thing you should know, first of all, about those type of accounts is it is the child's money. You are just custodian of that account until they reach the age of majority, which in Arkansas is 21. So in other words, if you create an account and that's meant to be for college, when that child turns 21, it's their money, and there is really nothing you can do about it. So that really relinquishes control. It does allow you to use it for other things other than qualified education expenses, but it also allows them to go to the casino if they want to, right? So, I mean, you have to really be careful about how you hand the keys over there. But I want to talk a little bit, too, guys, about the win you should be looking at here as far as a 529, as far as just a general plan for your child's college education expenses. To our point earlier, if you're in the sandwich generation, you need to make sure you're still funding your retirement first. We're big believers in this. We want you to help your child, and it is a great, great idea to get your child through college with no student loan debt. I want that for my children as well. But think about how this works if you do that at the expense of your retirement. Say you cut off your contributions to your 401k, but just for those 4 or 5 years that you're trying to save for your child's college or whatever the case may be, and you don't get that employer match and you get off track for retirement. When you reach retirement, there is no financial aid coming for you in retirement, and you're going to be potentially dependent on your children to help you when you reach retirement and have those health care issues, those long-term care issues. So it's a noble thing to try to keep your kid from having student loan debt. But think about on the back end, if you do that and neglect your retirement, it really isn't helping your children out in the long term.
Here's a shocker. I worked. I worked and paid some tuition bills because my parents couldn't afford it, and we didn't want to go into debt. And so it literally was, an old school work through it. And I know a lot of parents don't want their kids to have that burden on top of the burden of a college education. But Tim, if there is a will, there is a way when it comes to college, and it doesn't have to derail your plan as far as your retirement is concerned.
Yeah, I didn't go to the 1 or 2 schools I really wanted to go to because the tuition and the living expenses were going to be a lot more than my parents could ever afford.
Yeah,
right.
And I didn't want to have to be burdened with it for a long period of time. So I went to a small liberal arts college, and I turned out just fine, I believe.
Jury's still out.
Jury's still out.
We'll ask Lori, but we won't ask her today.
Don't ask her today, right?
Yeah,
so,
especially if she's listening to the show.
But I went to a school that was offering the most scholarships and was going to cost me as little as possible because, I mean, it doesn't really matter that much what school you go to. The pedigree, I've been asked a few times where I've gone to school, but it's never been during a job interview. So I think we have to be careful on where we send our child to school. And if we're going to send our child to a $60,000 a year school over a $20,000 a year school, we have to have prepared for it. We don't want to take on that burden, and we definitely don't want to stop our retirement planning because we can never catch up. And it's going to be one of those things that we need to make sure that we're early on in the game as far as saving and be consistent in it.
On the other side of, I'm sorry,
No, I was actually going to go there.
Transition?
Yep.
Okay. On the other side of the sandwich generation is caring for aging parents. A record 42 million Americans are serving as caregivers for an aging parent or loved one. And among the 54 million Americans 65 and older, 70% will require long-term care services at some point. That's according to the Consulti Seniorly. I'm not sure what they are, but they have created this report. But we've heard that before from other places. 70% will require long-term care. So there's the big expense in caring for aging parents is you do get a lot of your health care paid for if they're 65 and older through Medicare, but you don't get the long-term care paid for. Medicare is only going to be helping out for the first 90 days of that. So long-term care has to be addressed for yourself and hopefully before your parents are in that need, because it's going to be too cost prohibitive then. But that's got to be a big part of someone's overall financial plan too.
Scott, I think a lot of people really get lulled into a false sense of security with their parents. They think their dad is, 10 feet tall and bulletproof, and mom's always been, the one that held the family together and made all the lunches and all that type of thing. And both of them look like superheroes, but they are human. And they will fail from a health standpoint at some point in time in high likelihood. And if they do not have the means to take care of that, then guess who that falls to? It falls to one of the kids. And I think it makes a lot of sense that if the parents can't afford long-term care insurance, that maybe the kids get together and buy long-term care insurance for them, because it's either going to cost you in terms of time and effort and money and all the things that burdens you with in your overall financial plan, or it's going to cost you a little bit of money as far as long-term care is concerned, relatively a little bit of money, comparatively speaking. But I think that that's something that far too few families have that kind of discussion with the siblings and the parents to say, how are we going to address this issue as far as it concerns our parents? And I think that's something that could go a long way toward relieving some of the pressure that the sandwich generation gets under in times like this.
That was the thing I was going to bring up too, John, is that the conversation needs to be had. And so often kids, I say kids, middle-aged Americans like Tim and I, who do have elderly parents or parents who are aging, they don't have that conversation of their financial situation. They may not even know if they have a long-term care policy. So they do have to have that conversation and create a plan. It all comes back to the plan.
It's all about the plan. And it's hard seeing your parents grow old. And I think sometimes, like John said, you see them as being bulletproof and 10 feet tall, and the next thing you know, you look at them, it's like, wow.
What happened?
What the years have caught up with them.
Yeah.
And by that time, it's probably too late for the long-term care coverage, because we're really looking at the sweet spot of when they're 55 to 60 for buying that. So we've got to take a step back, and we're going to be in our 30s probably, or early 40s when we're looking at buying that coverage for our parents. And so, and that's our busiest time. We're trying to keep up with kids. We're doing all kinds of other things, the ball games. Next thing you know, you turn around and your parents are older.
Well, if you think about the cost of home health care versus the cost of you going and actually performing that care yourself, then the cost of a long-term care policy is really minor compared to the cost of time and the cost of money for you to go over there and do it, or the cost of you shelling it out when you have a need because your parents can't meet that need. So I think that's a great conversation. And Scott, I think it's great that there's a great opportunity for people to have that conversation with our long-term care specialist here at GenWealth, Tony Contorno. Tony is wonderful at sorting through all the maze of things that are out there as far as long-term care is concerned. He can sit down with the family and really help to structure a plan that will address these needs. And that is how you really try to overcome this pressure that you're under the sandwich generation. You're still going to have the pressure of raising kids, but if you kind of take care of that college thing and kind of take care of that long-term care thing, then that actually relieves some of the financial pressure that could be upon you in a big way.
And you can schedule a long-term care review with Tony by texting LTC to 501-381-5228. Again, text LTC to 501-381-5228. We'll tell you again about that in just a moment. As you hear the final bell ring, it is time for our final thoughts, and Tim, we'll start with you.
Well, I think we talked about quite a bit today, and whether it's the young kids or whether it's your parents or whether it's about you, I think the big thing is you need to take care of yourself first and make sure that the priorities are set so that you're taking care of your retirement so you don't become a burden to your children, but then also try to make room to be able to help them through college and give the care you need to give to your parents.
Guys, I think that whether you're talking about inflation in the markets or you're talking about the sandwich generation and long-term care issues and 529 and college education plans, here's the deal. Education is the antidote to fear. And you don't need to be fearful of what's going on in the economy right now. You don't need to be fearful about this whole sandwich generation thing. Get help. And education is part of what we do here at Gen Wealth. If you're an educated consumer, you're going to be better off. And we walk you through that in the planning process here at Gen Wealth. And I think, Scott, that is clearly one of the biggest things that someone can do is to be sure that they are educated about these things. We quickly ran through the college planning options.
Yeah.
There's way more to it than what we could just communicate on the show today. There's way more to this sandwich generation thing than what we could communicate on the show today. Take a little bit of time, educate yourself with a Gen Wealth advisor, and we can help you through it.
My final thought is the Gen Wealth Ready to Retire process helps you create a written plan, and that written plan will include ways to maximize Social Security, considering a hybrid retirement, protect against inflation. We talked about that today. Secure guaranteed lifetime income, plan for long-term care, and defend against taxes. Is your written plan prepared in all of those ways? If not, reach out to a Gen Wealth financial advisor and get a review and a plan going today. That is going to do it for this week's show. Again, we really appreciate you listening, watching, wherever you get the Get Ready for the Future show, and we will talk to you again next week.
The Gen Wealth Financial Team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Gen Wealth Financial Advisors is an Arkansas-registered investment advisor with securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC.